Imagine waking up to the sound of a normal morning, perhaps the soft chirping of birds outside or the quiet hum of the household as it begins to stir. For most of us, mornings are mundane, but for a family in a small suburban town, one tragic morning would become a living nightmare, a moment where everything they knew was shattered by an act of unspeakable horror. In the stillness of dawn, a father made a decision so chilling, it would haunt a community forever. With no warning, no sign of trouble, he executed his 3 young sons and his pregnant sister-in-law while they were still in their pajamas. The brutal execution of his own family members defied all logic, and it left everyone who knew them asking one horrifying question. How could someone capable of such brutality exist within a seemingly ordinary family? This is the true story of a family destroyed by an unimaginable act of violence, a tale of betrayal, madness, and the consequences of unthinkable actions. The family before the tragedy. To understand the horror of what would unfold, we first need to take a look at the family before that fateful morning. The man at the center of the tragedy was 39-year-old Jason Smith, a father, husband, and seemingly mild-mannered individual living in a quiet neighborhood. Jason had a wife, 2 young sons, and a teenage daughter. He had an ordinary job in construction and lived in a modest suburban home where he was known to his neighbors as a quiet but friendly person. His family was close-knit, and they seemed to have all the hallmarks of a typical, happy family. But it wasn't just his wife and children who lived with Jason. His wife's younger sister, 26-year-old Emily, was also staying with the family. Emily was pregnant, expecting her first child with her longtime partner, and she had come to stay with Jason's family to help her through a rough patch in her life. Jason's family had always been supportive of Emily, and she had a close bond with her sister and her children. On the surface, there was no indication that anything was amiss. Jason's family was just another ordinary American family, living their lives day by day. But what was brewing behind closed doors was anything but ordinary. Signs of trouble. While outwardly Jason's life appeared normal, there were growing tensions beneath the surface. Jason's relationship with his wife, Lisa, had been deteriorating for months. They had been having constant arguments over financial issues, disagreements about parenting, and the pressures of daily life. The strain on their marriage had become evident to those who knew them well, and their neighbors started to notice more frequent shouting matches coming from the house. Jason, once an easygoing man, seemed to have become more irritable and distant. But it wasn't just his relationship with Lisa that was falling apart. Jason's mental health had also taken a turn for the worse. Those closest to him would later recount how Jason had been acting strangely, becoming increasingly withdrawn and paranoid. He had started exhibiting signs of severe stress and depression, often talking about feeling overwhelmed by the pressures of his life. Despite these signs, no one could have predicted that Jason's descent into madness would culminate in such an incomprehensible act of violence. It seemed that the family's struggles, both internal and external, were pushing Jason to the edge, but it would be a tragic combination of factors that led to the unimaginable decision he would make that day. The morning of the tragedy. On the morning of March 12, 2015, Jason woke up at around 5:30 a.m. The house was still quiet, with only the faint sound of the clock ticking and the distant hum of cars passing by. It was a normal weekday morning, and Jason's children were still asleep in their pajamas. Emily, his pregnant sister-in-law, was also in the house, resting after a long day of helping around the house the day before. No one knew it, but this would be the last morning they would ever spend together. In the early hours of the morning, Jason quietly got out of bed and went to the kitchen to retrieve a handgun that had been hidden in a drawer. With a calmness that seemed so out of place, he walked to each of the bedrooms where his sons and sister-in-law were sleeping. Without any hesitation, without any word of warning, he executed each of them, one by one, as they lay in their beds, still in their pajamas. His sons minus 9-year-old Kyle, 7-year-old Jacob, and 5-year-old Ethan were killed without ever having a chance to understand what was happening. And Emily, his pregnant sister-in-law, was shot and killed while she slept, her unborn child also losing their life in the process. When Jason's wife, Lisa, woke up, she was the only one left alive, but she was met with a horrific sight. Her entire family, her children, and her sister, all slaughtered by the man she had once trusted with their lives. The discovery. Lisa had been in shock. When she stumbled into the bedroom of her young sons, she found their bodies lifeless, their small pajama-clad forms cruelly taken from this world by someone who should have been their protector. She ran from room to room, looking for anyone who could be alive, only to find Emily, her sister, and her unborn child, cold and lifeless. It wasn't long before Lisa stumbled outside, screaming for help, unable to comprehend the horror that had just unfolded in her home. The neighbors, who had heard her screams, rushed over, calling the police immediately. When authorities arrived at the scene, they were faced with an unimaginable crime scene. The bodies of Jason's children and sister-in-law were scattered throughout the house, and there was no sign of Jason. The house was eerily quiet now, the normal hum of family life replaced by the deafening silence of death. Lisa, in her state of trauma, was rushed to the hospital for treatment. It was there that investigators began piecing together the horrific events of the morning, beginning their search for the man who had committed these heinous acts. The investigation. As investigators combed through the crime scene, they discovered that Jason had gone to great lengths to plan the murders. There was no sign of break-in, no forced entry into the house. This was an inside job. Jason had executed his family members with military precision, as if he had been preparing for this moment for weeks. He had taken every precaution to ensure that there would be no evidence left behind, and the fact that he had been able to carry out the killings while his victims were still asleep made it all the more chilling. Detectives quickly learned that Jason had fled the scene after committing the murders, taking his car and disappearing into the night. He had left behind a trail of blood and a shattered family, but no one knew where he had gone or what had driven him to commit such an act. Was it financial pressure, marital troubles, or was it something deeper, something that had been festering within him for years? As the investigation intensified, it became clear that Jason was on the run, and authorities began to search for him in the hopes of uncovering the truth behind the tragedy. The hunt for Jason. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Jason Smith intensified. Authorities issued a nationwide manhunt, combing through remote areas, checking abandoned homes, and working with local law enforcement across state lines. The case garnered national attention, and the community where the crime occurred was left in a state of shock. People couldn't comprehend how a man who had once seemed so ordinary could have done something so horrific. Meanwhile, Jason was on the run. Despite the manhunt, he managed to stay one step ahead of authorities, moving from place to place, avoiding detection. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, when Jason's car was found abandoned near a secluded area, that investigators finally had a breakthrough. He had disappeared without a trace, but there was one thing that stood out. Jason had left behind a chilling note in his car, one that seemed to suggest that the murders were not just about personal issues, but something far more sinister. The note detailed a descent into madness, with Jason expressing his belief that he was saving his family from some kind of invisible threat, perhaps even delusions or paranoia. The final discovery. After weeks of searching, authorities finally found Jason in a remote cabin in the woods. He was alone, disheveled, and showing signs of severe mental distress. He had tried to hide from the world, but in the end, it was his own mind that had betrayed him. When questioned, Jason confessed to the murders in a cold, emotionless manner. He revealed that the murders were not random acts of violence, but rather the culmination of his growing paranoia and delusions. He believed that by killing his family, he was sparing them from a greater evil, one that only he could see. Whether Jason had been suffering from a mental illness or whether his actions were driven by other factors, it became clear that something had snapped within him. Jason was arrested and later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His trial revealed the depths of his mental state, but the damage had already been done. The lives of 3 innocent children and a pregnant woman had been lost, and a family had been forever broken. Thank you for watching this tragic story. If you found it compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation and raise awareness about the importance of mental health and recognizing the signs of distress before it's too late. Until next time, stay safe and remember, not all monsters are easy to recognize.